So one of the many projects I've started over the years and never really got to finish was my review series for Grant Morrison's Batman. This was originally supposed to be a multi-part video series where I would review each little bit and chunk of the Grant Morrison run until its completion, but due to various other factors, probably college and studying at the time, I wasn't able to do it. However, now that I've basically more or less gone through all of the run except the last volume of Batman Incorporated, which I will try to finish over the span of the following week, I more or less have read all of the Morrison stuff, and I'm aware of what happens, what's going on, where it leads, and all that kind of stuff. And I've also have the benefit of time on my side, where I've gotten a bit, smarter as I've gotten older, says the 22-year-old. And I also have just a bit of a different perspective now than I did before, and I also think I'm just better at articulating my points than I used to be even a few months ago. So, instead of reviewing everything bit by bit, I will be doing it in 3 big kind of act reviews, because the run can be basically cut down into 3 big overall story bits, and that's, Act 1, which is everything from Batman and Son all the way to Batman's death in Final Crisis, quote-unquote. The second act would be all of the Batman and Robin stuff where Dick Grayson becomes Batman and Damian becomes Mr. Robin, and they do a bunch of cool stuff together. And, of course, the final act would be all of the Batman Incorporated things. So in this very first video, I will be covering everything from and Son all the way to kind of Final Crisis. So at the beginning, when Batman was going on in like the early 2000s after No Man's Land, he was very psychotic, very compartmentalizing, very not well balanced. And this was contributed to the fact that, of course, No Man's Land happened, and all of the years leading up to No Man's Land were filled with Jason Todd dying, the Killing Joke happens, Bane broke his spine, Alfred resigned, and there were also various chemical attacks on Gotham in Batman Contagion and Batman Legacy. Lots and lots of bad things were happening to Batman from like the late 80s to the early 2000s, and there was like this kind of narrative where Batman was just kind of getting worse and worse and worse. And this led to the War Games and War Crimes period where Batman was incredibly psychotic, very much an asshole. His relationship with the Batman family was not really good, and it all kind of came to a head in Infinite Crisis, where Batman took a gun and almost killed Alexander Luthor because he thought that Nightwing, aka Dick Grayson, was potentially killed at the climax of Infinite Crisis. And then we got DC 1 year later, where basically Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, they all realize that they have to rediscover themselves. They have to leave the superhero game for a while, re-energize themselves, find out why they're doing this, for who they're doing it, and to basically build themselves back up better and stronger than they ever were before. And Grant Morrison's run follows up with that, where Batman has gotten so re-energized. He's gotten so in tune with like the Bat family, with his own skills. He's just in such a good state that in a couple weeks he basically ends all supercrime in Gotham City, and basically most of his rogues gallery are imprisoned by the time Grant Morrison's run even starts. And so Batman is doing really well, he's in a comfortable place, but because he's just spent the past few weeks just being Batman, the run kicks off with Bruce Wayne needing to rediscover the Bruce Wayne portion of his personality. And this leads us to Bruce Wayne going to a London convention where he meets several big players who will play prominent roles in the following storylines, such as Jezebel Jet, a very on-the-nose written character, and of course named character, and we also get, the introduction of kind of like the more villainous Talia, and of course Damian Wayne. Batman and Son is a very simple story. It's only 4 chapters long. It gets what it needs to do very, very quickly. It doesn't waste any time. It's very fast-paced, but it gets a lot of points across in that short time span. And this is where the run immediately kind of becomes sort of divisive for a lot of people, because, like I said, the premise for the Grant Morrison run was that Batman has kind of found himself again, more or less, and he's re-energized and he's more well-balanced than he was during the early 2000s period. And so a lot of people were immediately thrown off by the introduction of Damian Wayne, the fact that Batman has a biological son, and a lot of people are still holding it against Damian. He does not leave a good first impression, but I think that is very important for his character because Damian is he is the son of Batman and Talia al Ghul. Batman is a good person deep down, but he's also had a tendency to be kind of an asshole. And then when you combine that with the fact that he was raised by Talia al Ghul and the League of Shadows, basically super assassin murderers who've been telling him from the day he was born and from the day he could understand speech that he will be the guy who's going to conquer the world. He's this heir to a great, massive legacy. There is perfectly good contextual reasoning for why Damian is the way he is, but that's what makes him so interesting, because deep down, when you remove all of the bluster, all of like the supervillain sneer, as Dick Grayson describes it later on when they become partners, Damian is actually a good kid. And there's a really great moment later on in the run where he confronts his mom about the fact that she loves him more for what he could be over what he is, which is a sad, ironic, kind of cyclical follow-up to her own relationship with Ra's, but we'll get to that later on. But Damian is an asshole in this very first storyline, and Damian never really stops being an asshole, but I think the difference is that Damian is an asshole with very little redeeming qualities at the start, but as he grows, as he creates relationships with his dad, with Alfred, and especially with Dick Grayson, Damian becomes a much, much better person, and his arrogance, his snottiness, his aristocratic sneer is mostly just kind of a facade for him to act tough when he's really just a regular kid who wants to, play video games, have friends. He's a, big proponent of animal rights and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's important to set up Damian as the most broken Robin so far. A dude who is kind of almost engineered to sabotage Batman's entire mission and to be almost kind of like a perversion of everything Bruce has ever tried to do right off the bat, because it makes his development much more poignant and much more important down the line. And I'm also just kind of divorced from the review aspect of this video, I should say. I'm a big fan of the fact that Damian never really completely changes. I'm a fan of the fact that he's able to keep his core personality traits, but he's also able to showcase how much he has changed instead of just becoming a generic goody two-shoes who spouts platitudes and loses his unique character voice. And another controversial aspect of this run is the fact that Talia is a full-blown villain, an aspect that a lot of people don't care for, but the problem with Talia, and this is a problem a lot of comic book characters in general have, is that her whole dynamic of, oh, will she join with Ra's or Batman, has no legs. You can only really do that back and forth so many times before it becomes really obnoxious and really boring, and before the tragedy of it just kind of wears itself out. So either make Talia Bruce's wife, just straight up have her side with Batman, or have her become the next Ra's. There really is no way you can actually get her somewhere as a character without just regurgitating the whole thing of, oh, will she join with the man she loves or her own father? So personally, I'm fine with Talia becoming a villain, and she also pretty much sets herself up as a fairly effective villain moving forward. And honestly, I find her kind of more interesting than Ra's al Ghul just by the fact how she basically repeats a lot of the same mistakes Ra's made with her and she does with Damian. So I find that dynamic very interesting. So Batman and Son, a very simple 4-issue tale that sets up a lot of things that will get paid off later on. There's a lot more things in here like Tim Drake feeling immediately inadequate by the fact that he was kind of adopted by Bruce Wayne, but then Bruce Wayne reveals he has a biological son. And so that immediately makes him kind of reckless for the rest of this run where he's really trying to prove himself. And this is kind of a storyline that happens even in his own Red Robin series later on. And that's all really kind of interesting. And it's actually really impressive by the fact that Morrison is able to tell so much about these people in a very kind of economical amount of time. There's no bullshit here. There's very little narration. It's all really fast-paced, but it all very much matters. The next big story is The Clown at Midnight. And this is another controversial bit of story because it was written in prose. It is written kind of like a book, except it has art in like the corners and in the background and stuff, and the art is very kind of like digitally created, and this threw a lot of people off because it's not really a comic book in like the traditional sense of the word. It's more like a traditional book in that respect. And for the longest time, I've avoided it because like the aesthetic of it did not appeal to me, and the prose is insane. Like, it's legitimately some of the most insane shit I've ever seen written in prose form. Like, the way Morrison describes events here in such grotesque but elaborate detail blows my ever-loving mind. Like, I cannot imagine ever reading a traditional book by Grant Morrison because I think my brain would just explode after about 5 minutes of reading it. And that is kind of the biggest strength and the biggest weakness of this book. If you're someone who likes books the way I've grown to, the elaborate prose is going to seem daunting to you at first, but I think it's going to get much better because you're going to be able to appreciate the artistry of what's going on. But if you're someone who's not really a fan of books, I think you can safely skip this because the later parts of the run basically articulate the whole point of The Clown at Midnight, and that's the Joker reboots, or rather resets himself every few years to basically throw Batman for a loop. And that's kind of the basic gist of it here. And the whole Clown at Midnight storyline happens after Joker is shot in the head by a fake Batman in Batman and Son, and he is deciding that, okay, I'm rebooting myself once again, and I need to destroy all semblances of my old life. So the issue is about the Joker creating these like elaborate traps where all of his old partners are being killed in droves, and the last one left is Harley Quinn. And so it becomes like this big chase to see if Batman can stop Harley from getting herself killed because she can't accept the fact that Mr. J doesn't love her anymore, quote unquote. It's, like I said, the prose is absolutely insane. It's elaborate, and the pages where Joker is describing his vile birth of his own self is some of the craziest shit I've ever read. And honestly, I think that even if you're someone who cannot like the rest of the issue, I think you should at least get to that part because it is inspired lunacy in the way it is delivered. Absolutely fantastic. I'm really sad that I didn't give this thing a try beforehand, but now that I have, I very much appreciate it. The next kind of story arc is The Three Ghosts of Batman, and this is where Morrison starts to bring back more of the Silver Age stuff from the Batman run into main continuity. Basically, the whole idea that Talia and Batman like hooked up was like from a story from like the 70s or the 80s, and so Morrison immediately sets a sort of precedent that he's going to be bringing back a lot of stuff that was done with Batman, but we don't like consider it technically continuity anymore. The Three Ghosts of Batman are him kind of setting up the fact that he's going to be bringing back a lot of Silver Age elements to the forefront, where we have these various different copies of Batman who like represent what he could have become, and we also get the idea that Batman, he subjected himself to massive hallucinogenic experimentation, and he went to like this weird martial arts isolation chamber. Basically, Batman did a lot of like mentally fucked up things to himself so he could possibly understand what the Joker was like, so that he could understand him and possibly fight and defeat him, or possibly even fix him down the line. And this is where that whole plot line kind of starts off. And this is where the run starts to get a bit more insane, a bit more psychedelic. This is also the part of the run where we get to Batman 666, the kind of apocalyptic, decaying future where Damian Wayne has become Batman. He's sold his soul to Satan, and Satan himself is a constant kind of adversary of Batman, as the rest of the run will show us. And there are constantly, biblical references, the Annihilation, Armageddon, and all that kind of stuff. This is where a lot of the biggest parts of the run for the first half, and even a lot of the second half, are greatly set up. But then we get to The Murder of John Mayhew. This is the part of the run where J.H. Williams III comes on to do the art. And if you've ever seen J.H. Williams III's art, he is absolutely fantastic. He has this really interesting way of creating innovative panel layouts that blow your mind. This is also the part where we get to the Black Glove. And the Black Glove is yet another secret society who wants to destroy Batman. And that's kind of become a trope that we do nowadays, where it feels like every new Batman writer has another new secret society that will break Batman in ways that we've never seen before. And the Black Glove is set up as this James Bondian evil organization that basically makes bets on people's lives. And the bet is, which is more powerful, good or evil, and they bring in these various different Batmen from all nations to this island to basically solve a crazy James Bond-esque murder mystery. It's pretty insane stuff, and it once again showcases one thing that Morrison loves to do, and that's make everything Batman's ever done canonical. For example, like the Batman of All Nations or the International Superhero Club, that was a club that was showcased in the Silver Age, but they never really took off as a superhero team. And he makes that a plot point in this storyline where Batman was the most popular one of them all, and he's the one who succeeded. He's the one who went on to join the Justice League to save the world. He's the successful story of that whole club, whereas everyone else has gone about it in different ways. Some of them, like the Gladiator, have become corrupt and they've sold themselves out. Others have sold their life stories as books, and now they're like making movies about themselves and TV shows and making money. Some of them have become despondent drunks. Others have fallen into straight up villainy. And it's a really cool metatextual story about how these seemingly forgotten characters can kind of go to shit even in their own universe, because there are, lots and lots of comic book characters that exist out there, and there are so many of them that just never stick with people and they fall into obscurity. And so it's really interesting to see a story make that an in-universe beat where, yeah, the Gladiator was a dude who showed up a couple times in the Silver Age, and since then he's become like this fat, obese little shit who sold himself out to the mob so he could make some money. And it also starts a really important trend for the rest of the run, and that is what makes Batman unique in comparison to everyone else. What is that secret thing that Batman has that the others don't? Because some of the others in the superhero club are thrill seekers, some of them are people out for redemption, others just want to make a quick buck in some way or another. But what makes Batman unique amongst all of these men? And this is actually part of the run that never has a strict answer. Well, it kind of does. The answer is because he's Batman, and that's another little metatextual thing that Morrison does throughout this whole run. But he has that special something. There is something unique about Bruce Wayne himself that allows him to survive all of this trauma and become truly incorruptible. The run continues on with kind of like a follow-up to the Three Ghosts of Batman storyline, where we're once again building up to the Black Glove as the big antagonist of the run. We're getting more and more insight into Bruce Wayne's relationship with Jezebel Jet, and Jezebel is kind of framed as she's kind of like an in-universe critique of Batman, where she's the person who finds out that Bruce Wayne is Batman. He takes her to the Batcave and he shows her all the things he's done with his wealth and resources and time, and she basically tells him, wow, you could have used all the billions you spent making this stupid fucking cave to basically solve poverty in Africa or something. And it's once again that kind of critique of superheroes where, oh yeah, superheroes don't solve real world problems, but the rest of the run does a really good job of refuting this, because despite the fact that the DC Universe does have real-world problems like poverty and crime and such that can be solved, it also needs people like Batman, because there will be super criminals in the world who will do terrible things to innocent people, regardless of the fact if Batman uses all of his money to solve crime or to solve poverty. Darkseid is going to invade regardless of the economical state of Gotham City. There are constant ever-present problems and adversaries that must be fought by people like Batman, and they will exist regardless of the fact if the real world problems, quote unquote, are solved. And this is something that I really love about the run that I didn't really notice beforehand, but it's very relevant because there are so many fans of comic books that say, oh, well, if Batman and Superman just solved all of these real world problems, they would just have no more enemies to fight. But that's categorically not true because alien invasions exist, attacks from other dimensions exist. There is a lot of comic book specific problems that Batman and Superman and all the rest of the DC characters, even the Marvel people, simply cannot solve, even if they get to all the quote-unquote real-world problems. And I really like that there is a comic book run that directly challenges that whole stupid critique and says, no, even if Batman did all the things you said, there would still be lots and lots of crises that would facilitate the need for the existence of Batman and other superheroes like him. And it also once again reinforces the theme that Batman is special and that he is necessary and that he will always need to exist to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. And then we get to the final bit of the first act, and this is Batman R.I.P. So this is coming out about the same time as The Dark Knight, and almost at the same time as Final Crisis, which is also written by Grant Morrison. And a lot of people, when they saw the title, they assumed, oh, Batman's gonna die, but will they really kill Batman in time for, like, his big mega blockbuster billion-dollar movie? And this is where the run gets really, really trippy, but the basic story is actually very, very simple. The Black Glove, who were established in the murder of John Mayhew, or rather, the murder of Mr. Mayhew, sorry, in the previous big arc, they basically attack Gotham wholesale, and this is where we once again bring in more and more Silver Age elements. If you remember what I said earlier on in the video, Batman subjected himself to a bunch of psychedelics and a bunch of hallucinogenics to try and understand who the Joker was and how the Joker worked. And in this run, we realized that Batman figured out that someone would someday try to attack him through those means, and he created basically a backup personality of himself to do that. And when the Black Glove kind of destroys Bruce Wayne, we get the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, who's a big throwback to the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh from the Silver Age, who's like an alien who observed Batman from like a distant galaxy, and he was inspired by Batman to be a superhero too, and then Batman himself goes to his planet and meets the guy, and we also get the creation of Batmite here, who is represented as the last vestige of Bruce Wayne and Batman's collective sanity when he becomes the mostly deranged Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, and this whole thing is a blast. It is kind of confusing when you read it for the first time, and if you're someone who hasn't read the run before this and you're not really aware of Batman's kind of history and the history behind a lot of these references and such, you're not going to get a lot of this stuff. But as someone who has kind of done his research and who has read this a lot and quite a few times, I consider this to be one of my personal favorite Batman stories of all time because it's just a great examination of his own character, and it's possibly one of the best examples of crazy prepared because Grant Morrison and then also Scott Snyder, who followed him, they basically write Batman as being so insane that he knows he's insane, and so he uses that as like a tactical advantage to fuck with his enemies and to beat them. And it's also a kind of like a big celebration of the character because it showcases, you know, his abilities, it showcases how far he has gone to make himself who he is, and it really does make him kind of like a mythological figure, this larger-than-life man who became a myth due to all the things he's done to himself and all the things that allow him to be who he is. And one idea that I've just gotten from this reading, and I never got it beforehand, was the idea that Batman could potentially be like a higher form of sanity, similar to the Joker, because Joker is described as being more sane than everyone else, i.e. that he's not crazy in a generic sense, rather that his mind works on a level beyond ordinary people, and that's kind of what this storyline in particular implies about Batman, that this is a dude who has pushed himself to his absolute limits and then 10 times beyond that, that he has reached a level of sanity, a level of physical strength and moral endurance that nobody else can match. And this is what the big message of Morrison's run overall, which is the celebration of Batman, why he's the coolest motherfucker who has ever existed, and that is really great to see. And possibly my favorite moment in all of Batman R.I.P. is when the Black Glove, who are these annoying asshole rich douchebags who are like, yes, you shall destroy Batman's entire life, like, look how cool we are. These rich douchebags, they're all celebrating, patting each other on the back, and then the Joker basically says, yeah, Batman's gonna dig out of that fucking grave you put him into. He's gonna come out of that, and he's gonna kick your asses, and when he's done, I'm gonna finish off the rest of you. Bye. And the only reason Joker's even in this story is because he wanted to see Batman as insane. And he's even kind of flattered by the fact that Batman made himself insane to try and understand him. He's like, oh, like you want to know what it's like to be me so badly that you did all this stuff to yourself? Like, that's actually really flattering. Like, thank you. And there's a really great even kind of critique of Batman's character here, where the Joker constantly talks about black and red, and then Batman's analyzing it, and he says, black and red is from, like, Gothic mythology, and it's, like, from Norse mythology, and it's also Art Deco, and he's, like, trying to make all these connections and stuff, and then it just turns out that Joker was trolling him. Like, black and red doesn't mean anything, it's just a random thing he was trying to make seem important, and so that's a nice little critique that even though Batman being crazy prepared is a good thing, sometimes he can miss the forest for the trees by overthinking something, and while the run is, like I said, a big celebration of the character, they don't really shy away from the fact that Batman does also have problems and flaws and issues, and missing the forest for the trees is something that does almost kind of screw him over, specifically in R.I.P. Then what follows is Final Crisis, and Final Crisis has a plotline where Batman is abducted by Darkseid, and Darkseid wants to use Batman as like a genetic template for the creation of a big metahuman army, which isn't the worst idea I've ever heard, because he would have interacted with Batman and he would be aware of the fact that Batman is a hyper-capable human being, and he's kind of the best human being you can get. And so the final parts of this run, which deal with the whole last rites stuff, are the fact that Batman is abducted, and the servants of Darkseid are subjecting him to, like, these mental probings where we're basically seeing, like, the updated backstory of Batman. And this is where we get even more Silver Age stuff being brought back into main continuity, such as Kathy Kane, the original Batwoman, and the adventures of Batman and Robin on weird planets and stuff that are retconned into being, like, hallucinogenic acid trips, as part of that whole isolation chamber process. Once again, establishing the fact that every Batman story that's ever happened is canon one way or another, which is really cool in my opinion. And this whole little final bit of the first act reinforces the idea that Batman has something that makes him special, that makes him different from everybody else, because they're trying to create clones of Batman, but when the clones experience all the things he's gone through, all of the things that have happened to him, all the things he's done to himself, they cannot take the trauma. The trauma of just a portion of Batman's life is enough to make them all reflexively kill themselves and burn themselves out. And Batman just survives all of it because he's motherfucking Batman, and there's something intrinsically special and powerful about him that you can't even replicate through a clone, which is traditionally supposed to be a perfect copy of yourself. And there's even a cool little plot line here that I didn't notice the first time, where they're using, like, this lump guy who looks like Clayface to extract Batman's memories. And there's a little subplot with Lump where the Lump is just an expendable tool by the forces of Apocalypse, who's going to get forgotten and annihilated the second he does his job. But when the Lump experiences Batman's entire life and he grows to intimately know him, he burns himself out, but he also says that I can't help these people. I've seen the noble human spirit that you have, and I want to help you stop them. And Batman, in return for this, says, you're not going to be forgotten, Lump. You're not just going to be another tool the dark side throws aside. I will remember you, a person who knows me almost as intimately as Alfred Pennyworth. That's a cool, really cool little moment that showcases Batman's humanity and his, capacity for compassion. And then there are other instances of that I don't really want to spoil. But once again, reinforces that whole idea that Batman is the greatest motherfucker that's ever existed. And it's hard not to get a kick out of that when it's executed the way it is here. So yeah, that's kind of my general review / overview of the entire first act of Grant Morrison's Batman. This is one of the best runs that's ever been done on the character, and it's really great to go back to it a bit older, a bit wiser as I am, and to just see how all these things pan out, see how things develop, and of course with the benefit of hindsight. So yeah, this is available in omnibuses, in various different kinds of trades, so get your hands on this shit as soon as you can, because trust me, we don't get comics like this anymore.